Revelation chapter 14, and we made it up through verse 13 last week. But what we've been seeing in the last couple of chapters is kind of a behind the scenes of what's going on the earth, what's motivating the players, the people who are in play, the Antichrist, the false prophet. We've seen Satan described as the dragon. The people of the earth choosing to either follow Antichrist, knowingly worshiping the dragon rather than worshiping God and rejecting God, or refusing the mark and basically losing their life. They won't have any opportunity to do anything. They won't be able to buy, they won't be able to sell. I'm sure you won't have a job. It'll be a lot like, remember when we were going through the letters to the churches in the first couple of chapters, we talked about Caesar worship and what they had to go through with that. They had to go once a year to the temple of Caesar. They had to bow. They had to declare that Caesar was Lord. And then they would be given a certificate so that they could go back and they could have their jobs and keep their jobs and even be able to worship in other temples to whatever God they wanted to worship. Rome really didn't care where they worshiped all year, as long as once a year they came to Caesar's temple and they declared him to be Lord over everything. And so the Christians of the day were marked. They were set apart from everyone else because they did not have that certificate declaring that they would worship Caesar, that Caesar was their Lord. And so they lost their families, they lost their jobs, they lost everything that was to them. And it'll be very similar in the tribulation time when we refuse to take, not when we refuse because we won't be here, but when they refuse, those who become believers during the tribulation time, when they refuse to take the mark of the beast, it'll be very similar. It'll be the very same thing, basically. I mean, what would be the point of giving somebody a job who doesn't have the mark? If you can't pay them anyways, they won't be able to buy, they won't be able to sell, they won't have anything. Probably everything they have will be seized. It won't be an easy time. That's why I tell people who think that, well, I'll wait and see if all this is going to start to happen, and if it does, then I'll believe what you said. And it's obvious during that time there's going to be tribulation saints. There will be those who give their heart to Jesus. I'll do it then. And that's crazy because it won't be a good time for you. And I don't believe, first of all, that if you reject him now, openly reject him now, that you'll have even an opportunity to receive him then anyways. When we looked in, 2 Thessalonians, I think, talked about being given the strong delusion to believe the lie, those who reject him now. And so they'll be caught up in this. They'll probably be the ones that fuel the fire to blaspheme the God of heaven that we see. And that goes even as we get into chapter 16, which we won't make it probably to 16 today, but when we get into chapter 16, we see the bowls begin to be poured out. And in at least two of the plagues, they blaspheme the God of heaven as his judgment's being poured out. So the lines are drawn very clearly between who you will worship and who you will not worship. And there'll be no option. There won't be many religions. There won't be many gods, because he will be as exclusive as Jesus is exclusive to get into heaven. All right? When Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and life, and no man comes to the Father but by me, he meant it. And just as adamantly, the false prophet will say, get on your knees and worship the beast. Worship the Antichrist. It'll be the same thing. There'll be two sides. The Bible tells us already, you're either for him or you're against him, referring to Jesus. So you may think that you have other options. You don't. You either have Jesus or you don't. If you don't, you'll be one of the ones that we'll see at the end of this book go with the Antichrist and the false prophet in death, in hell, in Satan, and follow them into the lake of fire. All that being said, again, we're looking at behind the scenes things here. So we've seen the beast, or the false prophet, the Antichrist. In chapter 14, we see Jesus as the Lamb. We're seeing kind of a foreshadowing of things to come in the next couple of chapters. John says in verse 1, I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And we talked about the fact that the 144,000 will finally be gathered all in Jerusalem, on Mount Zion with Jesus. Now, we know that they are not harmed in the tribulation time. This is one of the enemies of Antichrist that he cannot overcome. They are not allowed to be touched. They have a protection that nobody else has. And they'll be, except for the remnant of Israel that goes into hiding, probably in Petra. They also will not be able to be touched. It'll be the other Gentile believers outside of that, outside of the protection of Israel, that will be the martyrs of the tribulation time. They will follow in the footsteps of our brothers and sisters now and even our time that lose their lives for the faith all over the world. But he looks and he sees Jesus standing on Mount Zion. He sees the 144,000. And then you hear worship break out. A song among the 144,000. You hear the harpists playing. Which, that may be us being the band for the 144,000. I don't know, a couple chapters back we were shown that we were going to be given, the church will be given the harps in heaven to be able to sing our song of praise to the Lamb, to the one who has redeemed us. Maybe we're playing for them at this time. But here's the harps playing. And he goes on to a more specific definition of the 144,000 and who they are and what their lives will be like. Ends that description with, in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And that may be a reference to Joel chapter 2 and Acts chapter 2, where Peter is preaching from the book of Joel. And what he shares in Acts doesn't complete the whole prophecy, but when you go back to Joel, it does complete the whole prophecy in that they're going to be saved and to be redeemed. Verse 6 said, I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. Another witness of God and another proclaimer of the gospel. We have the 144,000. We have the two witnesses that will be in Jerusalem for 3.5 years, who will be finally, after 3.5 years, be able to be put to death by the Antichrist. But then 3.5 days later will come back to life again and then ascend into heaven. So you have the 144,000 witnesses all over the earth, Jewish witnesses all over the earth. You have the two witnesses in Jerusalem. And you have this angel now, toward the end of this time, an angel, an angelic being who will fly all around the earth proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ to everyone. In verse 7 it says, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. And then you have another angel, verse 8. It says, another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of the indignation, of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment has ascended forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So you have two more angels that begin to pronounce judgment now. They proclaim that Babylon, the world system, is fallen. And there's reason to believe that Babylon will be rebuilt again in Iraq. Others think that, no, it's America. Other people think that it's Rome. There's a whole lot of ideas, and we'll kind of fish through some of them as we get more into the description of Babylon the Great. I personally like to just take things, at least it's easier to take them at face value, the way God has put it in the Bible. I believe that there's going to be another Babylon. If you can see the temple built in a short time in Jerusalem, and you can see that the technology and the way we build buildings now and how fast they go up now, it's not going to be any surprise to me that a city would be able to be rebuilt in the Middle East, and it could become the center of commerce again for the entire world, and that the Mediterranean Sea would be filled with ships and the comings and goings of trade for whatever it's worth at that time. There'll be plenty of other natural disaster to kind of make everything focus on that area of the world at that time. With all the judgments being poured out, a third of the earth judged in the seals, a fourth of the earth judged in the trumpets. A lot of places are going to be laid waste and very desolate, and it's going to kind of focus everybody into one area. So my personal belief is that you'll see the city rebuilt. But at the same time, you're going to see this great center of world power, both religious power and economic power, is going to fall. And this second angel says, Babylon the Great is fallen and is fallen. And that it's judged because it has forced the rest of the world to come under its dominion. It has forced them to worship the beast. It has forced them, to do everything instead of Jesus. And we already see that mentality worldwide now. It's anything but Jesus Christ. Anything but. He's the only one that's really super resisted against. And angrily, aggressively resisted. Aggressively persecuted Christians are. Even by groups that you thought were supposed to be peace-loving religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, aggressively persecuting Christians now. They all leave each other alone, unless it's, border wars. And even within Islam, in the past you've seen the different factions of Islam fight with one another. But right now, what are you seeing? You're seeing them all unite with one common goal: wipe out Israel. So you see, they're judged because of this, because of their fornication, and that's what it's talking about. Fornication speaks of sexual sin. It will probably be very prevalent, but idolatry in the Bible is also compared to sexual sin against God. So it's the same kind of mentality. It's anything, again, except for what God wants. And then the third angel speaks to the personal responsibility of each person within that system. So it's not just that systems, it's not just that leaders are going to be judged, but all the people within those systems. If you choose to take, that's still going to be, even though it'll be forced, it'll be mandatory to take that mark. If you choose to follow that, you've made the choice. There's personal responsibility in it. And those people will be held responsible themselves for partaking in the wrath, or partaking in the fornication that is mandated by this world system. And so they too will drink of the wrath of God. And it shows their end. Our personal choices matter. Nobody will be able to stand before Jesus and say, my life is what it is because of my parents or my grandparents or my DNA or the food that I ate or the city I grew up in, or I just never heard. Nobody will. Romans chapter 1 makes that very clear, that there will be no man without excuse on that day. And people say, well, what about the guy in the jungle that never, heard the good news, never heard the gospel? I leave that in the hands of Jesus. I'm not even going to mess with that. What his word says is that there's no man. And the promise in John is that Jesus is the light to every man coming into the world. That tells me that everyone is born with the natural desire to seek out their Creator. And if they truly are seeking Him, He's going to reveal Himself to them, one way or another. Not to mention the fact that that first angel pretty much takes care of that argument, at least in their time anyhow. That he'll go and he'll preach the gospel everywhere to everyone. There won't be the possibility that one man, at least in this time, won't have heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. There'll be no excuse. Every argument of man against how God can hold us accountable will be taken away during this time. Just as every god in Egypt was addressed and defeated in the 10 plagues that went against Egypt just before the Passover to deliver Israel. In the same way, every argument against God is going to be taken away in this 7 years. And there'll be no excuse anymore. Not that there ever has been one. Then you look at verse 12. It says, here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. Blessed are those who die in the Lord from now on. And listen, the Bible tells us God takes pleasure in the death of his saints. He understands what we live through. He came here in the form of man. He understands what it means to be tempted. He understands what it means to try to be and live a faithful life. And he's the only one who accomplished it. But to have to live with all the corruption, all the sin, all the demonic, everything that goes on around us. He understands that. And he understands that when you die here, if you die a believer, you go directly into the presence of God and you enter into your rest. You will finally have real rest. You won't ever experience complete rest here, I don't believe. Not compared to that. There's always something for us to do here. We need to seek out times of rest. We need to get away. We need to go leave the cell phones at home and get away from all the stupid technology of this world and go someplace quiet and spend it with our families, spend it with Jesus, and have some time with no interruption. He set that example in his lifetime here too, that he would go away even from the 12 and go up in the mountain and spend time praying, spend time with the Father. But we also see him so physically exhausted that he can lay in the bottom of a boat in the middle of a huge storm, where men who grew up making their living on the sea were afraid of the storm, and he's asleep. And he stayed asleep. I've slept through some pretty hard storms. I've had people say, man, did you hear the storm? I didn't hear anything. I went to bed, the moon was out, I got up and the sun was out. I missed the storm completely. I've slept through some pretty weird things. I've slept in some pretty weird places, on boards in an airplane, on top of bombs in an airplane. And I figured that was, if something was going to happen to the plane, that's the best place to be. It'll just be done right now. I'm going to see Jesus. I don't have to worry about falling or anything. I'm just done. But it won't be anything compared to that rest when we finally get there. No more having to worry about eating the right food or eating anything. You haven't seen anything about any of these guys in heaven whenever worship's breaking out. You haven't seen anything about them eating anything, have you? They just wait for another moment to start worshiping. And as soon as the cherubim start, everybody else starts. These guys fall on their face, everybody else falls on their face. Everybody throws their crowns down. Everybody gets the harps out and starts playing and singing, and that's what they wait for. So this is the patience of the saints, to endure this kind of thing that they're going to see happen. And there's two different aspects to that. For one, there's the personal endurance. All the pressure that's put upon them. All the pressure to just try to survive the time and still present the gospel. But also the endurance and the stress, really, of seeing everybody openly reject God. We see it now, right? Doesn't it break your heart sometimes to see what men are doing? Don't you think, what are you doing? What insanity. And imagine in a time now where you are openly taking a mark. And I've said, with all the technology that can make this thing happen, I still believe there's going to be a physical mark. There'll be some sort of tattoo on your right hand or forehead so that everybody will know. It'll be a declaration, open declaration, that I serve the beast. I serve that man who set himself up to be God. I worship him. It'll be an open mark. But to see that, to watch it happening, So then we get to verse 14 where we left off. It says, "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud. And on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped." The Son of Man sitting on a cloud, that was like Jesus' favorite title that he gave himself. In Matthew alone, he referred to himself as the Son of Man 25 times. Daniel refers to him as the Son of Man. John refers to him as the Son of Man, to whom it has been given by God to judge the earth, the authority to judge all of mankind. And so here you sit and you see, and this sickle is a symbol of judgment. This reaping, this harvest, isn't like the last few believers that he's pulling out of the earth. When he's told it's time now to judge. God's wrath is about to become complete. His judgment in these last 7 bowls is going to be his complete wrath. The time is done. And the angel's telling him, it's time. And when you see that the harvest is ripe, it's not ripe as in ready to pick and ready to consume. It's overripe. It's rotting. It's rotting on the vine. It's the same when you get down in the angel again, throws in a sickle and reaps some more. Because the harvest is ripe, because the vine is ripe. The ripeness there is overripe. It's rotting. It's past time to harvest this. There's nothing left to salvage this. It's time to get rid of it all. He's sitting on a cloud. The cloud is always a symbol of the presence of the Father, or the presence of God. In the tabernacle, in Exodus, the cloud came into the tabernacle, the cloud of God, so that nobody else could do their job. In Solomon, when Solomon dedicated the temple that he built, the cloud filled the temple, and the priests couldn't even perform their duties for a while because the presence of God was so great in the temple. When Isaiah had his vision in the temple, the cloud again at that time filled the temple. When Ezekiel sees a vision of the temple, when he's taken from Babylon in a vision and he's taken back to the temple, and he sees the cloud leave the temple because of the adultery, because of the fornication, because of the uncleanness that is happening in the temple itself, because of what the priests have brought in to the temple. He sees the cloud leave. Moses was commanded, and we're going to see a little bit more of the temple or the tabernacle here mentioned in this chapter. Moses was commanded to follow very strictly the guidelines given to build the tabernacle, because it was a model of what's in heaven. And God wanted it to look exactly like the place of worship in heaven, of his throne room. It says, so he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, who had power over fire. And he cried with a loud cry to him who sat on who had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horse's bridle for 1,600 furlongs. So now you have another angel with the sickle. And again, the vine is overripe. It's rotting. The fruit is rotten. There's no good fruit left in the earth. There's nothing left. And it needs to be trampled out. It's out into the winepress, outside of the city. We see these again. references to this in the Old Testament. In Isaiah chapter 63. Remember, Jesus said that when he comes, he would come, and you would see him come from the east to the west. Speaking of the rotation of the earth and the way that he appears, the rotation of the earth will allow everybody to see him like he's coming from the east to the west. It says, who is this who comes, verse 1 of 63 says, who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like one who treads the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me. For I have trodden them in my anger, and trampled them in my fury. Their blood is sprinkled upon my garments, and I have stained all my robes. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. I looked, but there was no one to help, and I wondered that there was no one to uphold. Therefore my own arm brought salvation for me, and my own fury, it sustained me. I have trodden down the peoples in my anger, made them drunk in my fury, and brought down their strength to the earth. And Zechariah 14 has a similar passage. Zechariah 14, verse 1. Verse 1 says, behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the house is rifled, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two, from east to west, making a very large valley. Half the mountain shall move toward the north, and the other half toward the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Aziel. Yes, you shall flee, as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. It shall come to pass in that day that there will be no light, the lights will diminish. It shall be one day which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time it shall happen that it will be light. In that day it shall be that the living waters shall flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, and half of them toward the western sea. In both summer and winter it shall occur, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be the Lord is one, and his name one. So part of that is the judgment, and his coming in the judgment tells us there that he's going to come. When he does come back, he's going to set foot in the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split in half. They've built a big hotel up there, and my understanding is while they were doing that, the geologists found a huge fissure that runs from the east to the west. So it's already ready. As soon as he sets down his foot there, that thing's going to split in half. Promise that he's going to come again. Joel chapter 3 speaks of the same day. And starting with verse 1 there, it says, for behold, in those days, at that time when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land. They have cast lots for my people, have given a boy as payment for the harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. So you have the debauchery that's happening there, and just the insanity of how we treat people and how they treat people. But there's a warning there that's kind of like a warning to all of us, all nations, that we've scattered Israel all over the world, but that we've divided up their land. We should cringe every time one of our politicians suggests that Israel should lose part of their land or give up part of their land. God's going to judge the nations for that. And we played a hand in what's going on there. We have, with everything we can, insisted that they give back the Golan Heights, that they give back part of the land. And so now they have a southern border that's full of terrorists and terrorist organizations as governments that lob rockets and bombs into Israel. And we admonish Israel every time they respond back. And we've told them to give back part of the north, and they did that. And what do they get in return? The same thing. And you get rockets coming from the north, and you get rockets coming from the south, all into Israel. And when they respond, everybody hates them. And now you have Russia sitting in Syria telling Israel, you better not mess with Iran. Because if you do, we're coming after you. Guess what? That's prophesied in the Old Testament too. That big fishhook that God's going to use to drag Russia down into the middle of all that. Sitting right there. And our own president has a cabinet member who says we need to just go ahead and invade Israel and force them into a peace treaty with the Middle East, with the rest of the Islamists there, the rest of the nations. That's just been in the last couple of weeks. The threats from Russia has just been in the last couple of months. Guys, we're sitting right on the threshold of all this happening. We are right there. You know, it's disturbing. The insanity of man is disturbing, but to watch prophecy begin to form and unfold in front of our eyes. There are guys who study prophecy that will say that our time, our day, there's been more written in prophecy about our time, the day that we live in now, than any other time in history of man. If you study the prophets, even just read through them, you'll pick off things that pertain to our day. Without having to have some theological seminary degree. Which most of them don't mean anything anyways, because the theology they teach doesn't have anything to do with the Bible. The day of judgment's coming. It's been prophesied for a long, long time. We've had types. We've had other wars that look like, other times when God has protected Israel. Just look even in our own lifetime, or the lifetime of our parents if you're my age, and since Israel's become a nation, how God has defended them. Like immediately, like the next day. Because finally when the world power said, all right, we'll go ahead and let you, we'll go along with our promise and we'll let you have your land. It was like the next day, they're under attack. And there's been all these wars with all these nations that were established and had armies and had militaries that should have been able to crush this little country. We have states a lot bigger. The state we live in is bigger than Israel. And it's like 60 miles across at its widest point right now. And they've never occupied all the land that God promised them. All the land He told them was theirs. They've never fully occupied all of it. They will. It's theirs. And we shouldn't be telling them anything and telling them to give up anything. Where are we at? Verse 19. Let's go back to Revelation 14 if you're not already back there. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled out. And we saw that in some of those. I think it was in the first one in Isaiah 63. The same kind of reference. And the blood came out of the winepress up to the horse's bridle for 1,600 furlongs. That's about 200 miles. So now there's some debate. Is it 200 miles like circumference around Jerusalem? Or is it 200 miles where they think that it goes from, is it Basra? It used to be the capital of Edom, all the way to the Valley of Armageddon, that's about 200 miles. The length of Israel is about 200 miles. So picture that, 200 miles, up to the horse's bridle. For any of you who've worked with horses or know about horses, that's pretty stinking deep. You think, that's a lot of blood, that's a lot of people. I don't know if we could do all that. And it could be kind of symbolic. But again, I'm kind of taking this at just, this is what God said. As deep as a horse's bridle for 200 miles. Consider that this time all the nations have gathered into that valley to go to war. And we'll see in the next couple of chapters, when they see Jesus come, they all turn on him. They all are there to do battle with Messiah. And they know who it is. They've already been blaspheming him through all the judgments. You've had the witnesses. They knew this day was coming. And they're all gathered there to do war. And here comes Jesus with his saints, with us. And they're going to do battle with us? With him? It's not even with us, really. I think we're just kind of like a show of force. There's nothing in here that says we actually swing an axe or do anything. We don't do anything with this. We just show up. It's Jesus who does all the fighting. It's Jesus who has the sword that comes out of his mouth. He's the one that has the sword. He's the one that has the sickle. He's the one that plays out the judgment. They say that in 70 AD, when Titus Vespasian came into Jerusalem and slaughtered the Jews there, that the blood ran so deep through the streets of Jerusalem that it ran into the people's houses and put their fires out. That's just the population of Jerusalem. It's also said that when they did the sacrifices in the temples and the blood ran out of the temple area and down into the Kidron Valley, that little river, that little stream down there, turned into blood, basically. It ran with blood. It was bright red like it was blood because of the number of lambs that were sacrificed at the time. My own personal opinion, it's going to be blood as deep as the horse's bridle for that long. That's how many people will be gathered there. That doesn't leave you much left of a population of this earth. Considering what we've already lost in the other plagues and the other judgments, how many people have already been taken out in those alone. And now you have this great judgment where so many are slaughtered that blood can run that deep. When you go into the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the millennial reign of Christ, it's only believers that are left. It's only those who have survived the tribulation time. Those who have made it through with their life that go into that time and begin to repopulate the earth for that 1,000 years. But then again, at the end of that 1,000 years, the wickedness of men's hearts revealed again. Satan's let out of the bottomless pit, and another rebellion, one final rebellion. And if I remember right, there's not even a lot of detail to it. It's just basically the rebellion was there, Jesus puts it down, and then we're on to new heaven and new earth and new Jerusalem. And we don't remember this anymore. That's really the part I look forward to. No more memory of this life. You know, when I share my testimony, I try to focus on the things that God has done for me. I'll share a little bit about what He's delivered me from, or what He's kept me from. I don't like to focus on all that junk and garbage that used to be in my life. I want you to know what God's done for me. You know, I don't need to give you details of a drug party or a drunken party, a drunken state. It's enough for you to know that I did those things, even after becoming a Christian. How stupid was that? It's enough for me to say I went places and did things that I shouldn't have done, that I knew better than to do. And yet my God never forsook me. He never left me alone. He came after me. He reminded me who I belonged to and asked me why I was there. And he brought me back. And all I had to do was turn around. I didn't have to clean up. I didn't have to walk back 100 miles. All I had to do was turn around. I don't want to remember any of that. And I'm not going to have to. That's why I can say I look forward to going through that fire. And it says all the hay and stubble and junk that we've piled up, whether we think it's good or not, all that stuff's going to be burned away. And all we come out with on the other side of that fire is what's been done for Jesus. And that's all I want. I don't want to carry any of this other baggage with me. But now, patience of the saints, right? We wait for our time. But we don't just sit and wait. We can sit back and look at all this stuff and have our Bibles out and look at what God's doing and look at the prophecies that are being fulfilled. And I want you to do that. I want you to do that with all my heart, but I want you to take that and let it motivate you to do something. Not just sit and watch like it's a TV show. Move with some desperation for the time. Chapter 15 is pretty short. I think we got enough time to at least get into it a little bit. It says, then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. And I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who have the victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, having harps of God. They sing the song of Moses, and the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the saints. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. For all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments have been manifested. After these things I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. And out of the temple came the 7 angels having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, and having their chests girded with the golden bands. Then one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. The temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed. So it starts off with worship. You see the 7 angels with the 7 last plagues. These are probably the same 7 angels, the same ones who came and poured out the seal judgments and then poured out the trumpet judgments. Now they're getting ready to pour out the bowl judgments. The completion of God's wrath. And I saw something like a sea of glass. And there's some debate about whether this is the same sea of glass that we stand on, or if this is a different one, or if it's just another image of the same sea. I think it's probably the same sea of glass, but is mingled with fire, because these who are sitting on it are the martyrs of the tribulation time. And it's kind of symbolic that they've passed through the fire, but yet they are now in the presence of the living God. And we know that it's them because they've had victory over the mark and over the number of his name, and they're standing on this sea of glass having the harps of God. Isn't it amazing? Everybody, as soon as they get there, they get issued this harp. They have the harps of God. And they sing the songs of Moses and the servant of God and the song of the Lamb. And Moses, when they came out of Egypt, when they crossed through the Red Sea, when they saw their armies of Egypt defeated behind them by the hand of God, they sang a song to God, a song of worship. Moses in Deuteronomy would also compose a song of all that God had done for them as they wandered through the wilderness, all the victory that He had given them. And I think this is a reference to that. The song is similar. And then the song of the Lamb in the beginning of Revelation. And each of us has had a song. When we get there, the saints have a song. The church has a song that they sing in heaven. The 144,000 will have a song that they sing that nobody else gets to sing. And now these saints, the tribulation saints, the martyrs of the tribulation time, have a song to sing. And this song speaks of a few different things. Your works, it says. Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. And that's the title El Shaddai. Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways. It speaks of His ways. The ways that He works. The direction that He wants to take all of us. It says, who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. It's what sets Him apart from everyone. He is the only holy one, the only truly holy one. The only one who's fully holy. Jesus is set apart from all of man because He is the only one who is holy. It says, for all nations shall come and worship before you. In Philippians it tells us that in that day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord of all, to the glory of God. What an amazing day. Some of us won't be able to get low enough. We'll take off our crowns, we'll throw them at His feet, we'll be on our face, willingly singing praises to God, glorifying God, and everyone else, they just won't be able to stand in His presence. They won't have a choice. They'll have to admit. It won't do them any good at that point, but they will have to admit. Just like when they came to arrest Him in the garden. He says, who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I am. They're down. They can't even stand in front of Him. And then when He lets them get back up, He answers them again the same way. I already told you I am He. But He lets them stay up that time. A demonstration of what it's going to be like. Only this time when we all come into His presence, it's not going to be to arrest Him, that's for sure. Oh, the foolishness of men's hearts, right? The insanity of men's hearts, especially in this time. To gather together to go to war against Him. What insanity. He also speaks of His judgments because they have been made manifest. They have been shown. There was nothing during this time that any power, Antichrist or any other power, could do to stop any of the judgments of God. There was nothing they could do. They could perform their own signs and wonders. We've been told that the false prophet would be given the power to perform many lying signs and wonders to give credence to the Antichrist. To then have the authority to tell them all they have to worship this other man. He'll even die from a wound and come back to life. But nobody, nothing will be able to stop any one of the plagues that are put out in judgment. Nobody will be able to stop anything, not even the Antichrist. After these things, verse 5, I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was open. And this is why I made reference earlier about Moses being instructed. Follow these directions to the letter on how you construct the tabernacle. Follow it to the letter. Someday we'll study that. Every single detail of that tabernacle speaks of Jesus Christ. Every single detail. The details of the furniture, the details of the tent, the tabernacle, inside and out, speak of the person and the character of Jesus Christ. Every single one. But in heaven, it's open. And the testimony, the law, that's the testimony of God. The law given. Remember, Moses was instructed to take that and to put it into the Ark of the Covenant. It was the testimony of God's promise. It said, out of the temple came the 7 angels and the 7 plagues, or having the 7 plagues, clothed with pure bright linen, having their chests girded with the golden bands. Similar dress that the priest would have worn in their service in the temple. These 7 angels come out dressed similar to the priests. So that it kind of speaks of their service in the temple and what they would have been doing in heaven. And one of the 4 living creatures, the cherubim, gave the 7 angels the golden bowls full of the wrath of God who lives forever and ever. Isn't it amazing how at different times, when somebody's speaking about the nature of God, they can't help but putting some kind, even if it's just a couple of words of praise with it. The wrath of God who lives forever and ever. They just can't help it. Paul's the same way. You see Paul started giving honor to God in some of his books, in some of his letters to the churches, and all of a sudden he just breaks out in a little bit of praise as he's writing his letters. And the temple was filled with the smoke from the glory of God and from His power, and no one was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed. And again, in Exodus 34 and in 2 Chronicles, when Solomon dedicates the temple he built, the temple is filled with the smoke, filled with the cloud, the glory of God, and nobody can even enter the temple to do anything until basically until God lets them come in, until He recedes enough to let them come in. And even here, no man can even go to the temple. None of us standing there, standing outside, seeing all this, seeing the angels, we won't even be able to enter the temple. One of the people I listened to this last week about this kind of put a little different spin on this I hadn't thought about before, but it's almost like God withdraws into the temple. Nobody can come in. This is it. And I'm not sure, on the one hand, God looks forward to this day because it's all done. Sin's done, enemy's done, everything's done. From here on, it's nothing but communion with the holy angels and with the saints. But at the same time, there are people that have nothing to do with Him, no more chance. Everything is also done for them. The finality of His wrath. And if he isn't experiencing some heartbreak, the Bible tells us it is not His will that any should perish. He made a way. He set it in place and in play before the foundation of the world, the Bible tells us. Before, in the beginning, He said, let's do it this way. They're going to blow it, but that's okay. We're going to create them in our image. We want to have fellowship with Him forever. So we're going to make a way. It wasn't just something He came up with along the way as you read through the Bible. It wasn't something He just came up with on the spot in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve fell. He already knew what Adam would do. And He already made a way. The provision was already set to go through it. The Bible tells us He doesn't take any pleasure in the death of the wicked. Takes pleasure in the death of His saints, but not in the death of the wicked. Because He knows that's it. There's nothing more to be done for them. They've made their choice. They're going to pay their price. And then verse 1 of 16 says, Then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go pour out the bowls of the wrath of God on the earth. The command from God himself, I believe. Let's finish it. Again, guys, as we look at what's going on around us, there should be some desperation in us. It's exciting to look at all the other stuff. It's exciting to hear men speak the words unknowingly that fulfill prophecy. When you hear somebody from our own government say we should invade Israel and force them into a peace agreement, that's just a sign of where our nation's going to be standing, what side it's going to be standing on. So when the Bible tells us that all nations are going to be against them, guess what? That includes us. And you can see the attitude is already there. When you see Russia being positioned, not by their own volition, but by the hand of God, they can think it's their own volition. They can think it's their own doing, but it's not. And you see the stage being set for God having to defend his nation and fulfill his promise. Again, we should be looking at it as the finish line. And in a race, you don't see the finish line and stop. You see the finish line, you run harder. You want to get there faster. We need to be about the Father's work. Kalamazoo has 78,000 people living in it. St. Joe County has 61,000 people or a little more. This is 2010 that I found. And Cass County is about the same. So you factor into northern Indiana, all these areas that we have access to just from right here, in this little building. And before you wonder, oh, how can we do that? We had over 90 people here for our Seder dinner. Came from all those areas. We had people from South Bend. We had people from Kalamazoo and a little bit north. And if we're still here next year, pastor in Battle Creek, Pastor Rick, it's like, hey, I think we're going to come next year. We'll have to rent a place next year. And if people from his church, the people that I think that are most diligent to go and do these things, and they're coming from Marshall. And if we could get the church from Sturgis to come, that's even more people. And God has put us right here in the middle of all of this. Who would have thought 3 years ago that this area would open up to us like this, that we'd be able to be effective in any of this? That we could be a part of not planting the church in South Bend or in Elkhart, but a part of supporting those two, that those two guys would come up in this next year. And the one in Sturgis was just the year before us. And being part of Kalamazoo, we were part of planting the church in Battle Creek, in Ann Arbor, and now probably hopefully soon in Allegan. And I was kind of like, man, I'm going to miss that, putting people out. I mean, it's cool to be part of being sent out. I'm going to miss that. That's what I wanted to do. And then we're here, and now these Joe and Jim over here in South Bend and Elkhart starting, and to be able to have fellowship from time to time with the rec laws over in Sturgis. Who knows what's going to happen just south of us in northern Indiana, other little towns. There's a lot of these places like here. If not starting more churches, home fellowships. Look at what we can do. One day this year, we had over 90 people in here. Just one day. If we only get one day a year to affect that many people, then great. Let's start getting prepared for it right now. Work toward that one day. when we'll have a lot of people. Whether we have to rent a place or we just open it up here and, too bad for the trucks and the rest of the place. Whatever we got to do. I was thinking about this in earlier today, and I thought about fishing, because I like to fish. And my brothers and I would get in trouble usually because we got home later than we were supposed to. We had some ponds about a half a mile from the house. We'd ride our bikes down and go out in these fields and fish in these ponds and throw each other in and whatever else we used to do to get in trouble when we did get home. But there were times we got in trouble because we'd be late getting home, and then mom's worried, and what did they do, and did they get hurt, or they are they floating now instead of playing? And what usually got us in trouble was one more cast. Just one more cast. Even still, when we get together, us brothers, and we go out on the boats in my dad's boat, and we'll pack 5 of us on his bass boat, which is really, that's a good way to get pierced. And usually somebody ends up throwing somebody in, and then pretty soon all of us are in. But except for my dad, we don't usually try to drag him in. But even still, it's one more cast, just one more throw. The one who wants to be there the worst is everybody else is reeling in and hooking up and setting the poles down, and there's always one of us that's still throwing one more time. Or back when we just used a rowboat, somebody would throw out a line and just troll it behind the rowboat all the way back to the dock. Never caught anything, but we just, something. Even my kids. They start getting bored. Oh, how much longer will we be here, Dad? Oh, just one more throw. See, I'm still the one. It's not them, it's me. Let me throw it a couple more times up here. All right, start packing your stuff up. I thought we were leaving. Yeah, we are in a minute. I keep going. Listen, if we're supposed to be fishers of men, that should be our mentality. It's about time. Sun's going down. It's about time to pack it up and go home, but still got a little bit more time. Just keep throwing it. Just think to yourself. Because it's easy to become discouraged. Why bother? Why bother to say anything anymore? Nobody's listening. Nobody wants to listen. We see the direction of our country. Why bother? It'd be really easy to sit back and just wait. It's not time to wait. It's time to move. Throw it one more time. Maybe you'll reel something in. If you don't, throw it again. Keep on fishing until it's time to go home, until Dad comes and takes us, and Well, as a kid, my dad could whistle from the front porch when it was dinner time, wherever we were at in the neighborhood. My dad wasn't the only one, so you knew your dad's whistle. He just got on the front porch, give a whistle, and you better come running, because it was time to eat. One of these days, we're going to hear a trumpet. You're going to hear your name called, and you ain't going to wait. You're just going to take off. Until then, we just keep going. All right? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you for your warning. Lord, I just pray that you would continue to use us even in those last days, that we would not become complacent and lazy, or even, Lord, that we would be so caught up with what is going on in the world that we forget those around us that are needing to hear your word. Those who need to feel your love and see your grace and mercy in action. Lord, as the world gets darker and darker, they still can't put out your light. Your light shines through us. So Lord, I pray that we would just give us opportunity. And that when we have the opportunity set in front of us, that you give us a boldness to seize that opportunity and speak your words, the words of salvation. Lord, that we would see a revival, that we would see a harvest here in our own community. Lord, show us best how to affect those around us. Lord, if there are any here today who don't know you and never given their heart to you, Lord, I pray that today you would speak to them and make yourself so very real to them that they can't deny it anymore. But also, Lord, they would have a longing in their heart to be with you and to know you and to want to walk in your ways. We just thank you, Lord, for all you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen.